Okay, so in our last video, and I want to thank again Beverly for requesting that we discuss this, we discussed different streams of religious Zionism. There are other streams as well. You know, there are those who basically, similar to Rav Soloveitchik, take it a little bit further. They separate their religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, but they're Zionists, but those are two separate things, meaning their Zionism and their Orthodoxy have nothing to do with each other. And they just accept it as a reality. There's various different, but they are definitely very distinct in the modern Orthodox mindset, meaning they wouldn't fit into an ultra-Orthodox mindset, which is probably why they, by default, wind up in Zionism. That's my theory. There's one MK, I can't remember his name, he was a Rabbi Melchior, is his name perhaps? He comes to mind to kind of fit into that rubric, that he's very much religious, and he's very much a Zionist, very much pro-Israel, but not, and so in that sense he's a religious Zionist, but his Zionism and his religion are separate. He doesn't believe to try to go make it a religious state and so forth in the way that like Kahana would want, and maybe Rav Kook would ideally have. Again, these are different approaches within the religious Zionist camp. If we go further, we can examine that there are other camps. There's, of course, basically there are three other camps that we'll discuss. One of which I'll only mention just basically because Beverly asked about it in the comment. There's the Agudah, which we could call non-Zionist, and there's the, for lack of a better term, Satmar or Satmar/Brisk, or Satmar/Brisk/Edech Haredis approach, which is anti-Zionist. Sometimes it's called the third karta, even though that kind of became a dirty word. So, and then another distinct group we could describe as Lubavitch. Totally, just like just about everything else they do, they have their own approach to things, which can't be pigeonholed in any of the others, and in a way is almost holistic, at least combining both the religious Zionists with the religious anti-Zionist. Agudah maybe not as much. I think that's the one place that Chabad doesn't fit in at all. And we can discuss that when we come to it. It's hard for me to decide which one I should discuss next. So I'm going to go with Agudah because it's the largest of the groups. Now, Agudah in a sense has a sort of a big tent approach to Haredi Judaism, because they seek to be the big tent of Haredi Judaism. They seek to be, their ideal is that they should represent Haredi Judaism as a whole. And really, probably in their hopes, Orthodox Judaism as a whole, kind of in a similar way that Mizrahi also wishes that they represent Orthodox Judaism as a whole. They kind of wish there wasn't an ultra-Orthodox. Agudah kind of wishes there wasn't a modern Orthodoxy, and a balancing act of respect between the two. Just to be honest, when you look from the outside, that's how it is. Maybe it's wrong, and not all individuals in there feel that way, but it's something to kind of feel out within really know the differences between them. Not that clear. Dagger La Torah. I don't know. I think one is Litvish and one is Chassidish. Now the has Litvish and Chassidish. As far as Shas and the Shas, somewhere ideologically Israel and vis-a-vis Zionism. In a way, it's kind of a mix of both, because Rav Ovadia Yosef was definitely more along the lines of Agudah Israel in his ideology, but he served as a chief rabbi, so he had to kowtow a certain amount of Zionism. However, his position of chief rabbi, the Rishon LeZion, predated the Rabbanut. But that's neither here nor there. And the same thing, so Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was also the Rishon LeZion, was also chief rabbi, and he was more along this position, as we mentioned in the last video, and he was actually, like I said, one of the few very major Rabbanim who had tremendous support for a Meir Kahane. Now, there are several approaches within Agudas Yisrael vis-a-vis Zionism. Now, I remember, like I said, I was speaking to one Hasidic Rebbe who, we would say, certainly his Zayda was a member of the Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, which is an Agudas Yisrael organization. However, he was friendly with both the Agudah and with the Beta Haredis. He was kind of in between those two worlds, so maybe this is where his ideology is coming from. This is a Polish Hasidic Rebbe. I'm saying this is a grandson of a Rebbe now, whose grandfather was a famous Rebbe. And I was talking to this particular Rebbe. This Rebbe told me he went to a certain shul, and that shul was, the Rav of the shul was my Rebbe in high school. And he said, this is incredible what this Rav accomplishes, that in Long Island you have Shalashudas in the dark like you have in Borough Park or Williamsburg. And he said that's quite a accomplishment. This Rebbe was there when the Rebbe was away sometime in the summer. The Rebbe was there for Shalashudas. He was impressed by the Balabatim and so forth. And by the fact that they conducted Shalashudas in the manner that you would see by Hasidic Rebbes. And I said, well, this Rav, he learns, he teaches a Shir and Rav Kook, and some people said I should have nothing to do with the Rav because he teaches Rav Kook. But is that just a Satmar approach, or is that a general approach? I was hearing from Satmar Hasidim, stay away from this Rav. Why is he teaching Kook? And I wanted the opinion from this Rebbe, who we could say had a connection to Agudah. Go to Bechiris. He said, and I said I had heard that Mr. Zalman Meltzer and Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner more recently had respect for Rav Kook, and even the Chavetz Chaim, they said, had respect for Rav Kook, even though I've heard conflicting reports about the level of respect that the Chavetz Chaim had for Rav Kook. And this Rebbe said, no. He said, nobody, meaning from the Haredi world, holds from Rav Kook. This is what he claimed. Whether it's true or not, it's not necessarily the point. The point is, this is what this Rebbe said. And we also, Rav Elyashiv was a Talmud of Rav Kook, and Rav Kook was Messiah Kedushin in his Chassid. And they were Mishpacha also. I think they were Mishpacha. What are we talking about here? The Rebbe said to me, he said the only difference between Satmar and Agudah is the Koisel and the Bechiras. And everything else they agree. Meaning that his understanding of Agudah Yisrael was that the only thing Satmar and Agudah Yisrael disagree, they both are essentially anti-Zionist. And this is answering Beverly's question. And so when you say that they're non-Zionist, it means that really they're anti-Zionist, but because of these two things they disagree about. That the Satmarov said you cannot visit the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, and the Satmarov said that you cannot go to national elections in Israel. Municipal elections he did allow. And that's it. That's the difference between Satmar and Agudah. Obviously, there will be different approaches within that. What I've generally seen is that the literature would agree with that. It would seem that was, Rav Aaron Kotler certainly had many things to say against Zionism, even though it's well known that Rav and Rav Aaron Kotler was the dean of Lakewood. It was well known that Rav Aaron and the Satmarov disagreed on these issues like voting, and Koisel wasn't an issue in Rav Aaron's time. He passed away before the Six-Day War. And yet they had tremendous respect for each other, and Satmarov gave a hesped for Rav Aaron. But it's very well known that even though they disagreed on this major issue of maybe a minor issue, maybe a major issue of going to Bechiras, of voting in the national elections in Israel, still they respect each other. And I heard that Rav Shneur Kotler was quoted as saying, someone said something to him about the Satmar Shita, about the Satmar opinion. He said, no, that's the Torah Shita. He said that the Agudah Shita, the Agudah approach, is a novelty. But the original Torah way is the Satmar way. That's vis-a-vis Zionism. Again, I've heard these being quoted, and even to today, it's known that Lakewood and Satmar have a very good relationship. Now, story with Kahneman in Panovich Rav. When he was building Panovich, he took money from the government to build the yeshiva. And so Karta came and protested that the building of the yeshiva. So a few of the Panovich Bachrim went to Panovich Rav and said to him that maybe we should chase away these protesters. And the Panovich Rav said, no. So if they didn't come on their own, I would have hired them to come. Because we're lucky they came on their own. Because I want the world to know that what I'm doing by taking money from the Israeli government is for the end. That's another obvious difference between Satmar and Agudah, is that the Agudah institutions will accept the funds from the Israeli government and the Satmar will not. The Agudah pay taxes and the Satmar does not. And then within Agudah, the question now of reporting to duty for the army in order to receive the matur that was always given to the yeshivas, to receive the exemption legally, or whether just to ignore the Israeli government. And which way is the proper way? And today, of course, Rav Shmuel Auerbach is taking a more Satmar type approach, and most of the rest of Agudah, with some exceptions. And I'm not so familiar with the politics behind that, so I don't know. I don't have what to comment on that. I've heard some people say, Eliashiv or Rav Steinemann, are greater gedolim than Rav Shmuel Auerbach, and Rav Shmuel should be machniya to them. And my approach is no, elu ve'elu. You have room for both different kinds of Klal Yisrael. I remember another Rebbe who I know in Yerushalayim, American born, and also from the same family as this other Rebbe I mentioned. And he told me, someone asked him, should he go to Bechiras? The Rebbe didn't say, do what I do. He said, what does your father do? He said, if your father goes to Bechiras, if your father votes, you should vote. If your father doesn't vote, you shouldn't vote. Don't follow me because I'm your Rebbe. Follow your father. And so then someone asked him, he said, I do go, because my father-in-law went. He's a Rebbe from his father-in-law. His parents, Baruch Hashem, are alive and well. This particular Rebbe. So he says, I go because, but he became a Rebbe from his father-in-law. He inherited his father-in-law. He says, his father-in-law voted, so he votes. But he doesn't expect his Hasidim to fight with their families just because they're his Hasidim. It's a very wise approach. Even though, again, some people who, from the old Hasidim who do vote, they say, no, our Kehillah, we should vote. We're a voting Kehillah. And they said, no, we're a Kehillah for everybody. And we don't, and it happens that that particular shul doesn't take money from the Medina, to the point where the Yerushalayim Rav goes to the mikveh of Erev Shabbos there, at that mikveh, because he knows that there was no money taken from the Medina to build a mikveh. But still going back to what I remember living in Yerushalayim and so forth, in general, when you looked at Panovich, even the Mir, those places, they did put a flag up for HER, and similar to like what we said in the last video, to what Rav Soloveitchik said, it's a patriotic act and not a religious act. It's Hakaras HaTov because the government gives them money, so they show Hakaras HaTov just like they would in America on the 4th of July, and they would in England, I don't know, on whatever, what do they have, Guy Fawkes Day, I don't know what they have there in Canada, on Day, whatever it is. flag, so too for Heir, they put up the flag, as opposed to the anti-Zionists. So anyway, they're not taking money, would not put up a flag, and of course, why should they? If they don't. And I learned in Or Sameach, and also Or Sameach was like that. And it seems like that was Rav Shach's position in Panovich. That was meaning, yes, we take from the government. Like at one point, Begin approached Rav Shach and said he wanted to start supporting the yeshivas at the Medina, because until Begin, the yeshivas. And Rav Shach asked, "Well, how much you want to give?" And Begin said, "I want to pay your whole budget." And Rav Shach said, "No, because, all right, you're friendly to the yeshivas now because you believe in God, you believe in the Torah, you the sentiment, Begin even he wore yarmulke most of the time and so forth. So, he put tefillin every day. He was like, you're friendly to us, but what's going to happen when the next guy comes along who doesn't want to support the yeshivas? Now we're going to be left in the cold. We're going to have nothing, because the whole rug will be pulled out from under us. And how are we going to survive then once we got used to taking money from the government?" So you want to give a half, give a portion, but don't give the whole thing, because if we take everything from you, we'll have nothing. Eventually, we have to look for the future. That was a wise approach from Rav Shach. Another statement about Zionism from Rav Shach was about the Shtachim, about these disputed settlements, and should B'nai Torah live in settlements. And Rav Shach, he said, you should know that at some point these settlements are going to be given back, and they're not forever. So, and it might be that you're going to lose faith when you see that happening. And hopefully you'll hear that there was an old man in Bnei Brak, speaking of himself, who predicted this. You won't lose your faith. And the fact was, there were a lot of people when some of the Shtachim were given back who did lose their faith. So, however, again, I've seen in general, I would say, with the exception of these rebbes I'm mentioning now, have like 1 foot in Agudah and 1 foot in Satmar. But in general, this idea that, like I quoted this one Rebbe of saying that Agudah and Satmar agree on everything except for voting and going to the Western Wall, I would say that is in general the approach of the Litvische Gedolim in Agudah, and it's less and less so. And the Hasidische Gedolim of Agudah tend to be more pro-Zionist than Litvische. I mean, first of all, in America, Litvische people speak English, and Hasidim usually speak Yiddish, with a few exceptions. Now, in Israel, it depends on the community. Meaning, so in Israel, you would expect that the Litvische should speak Hebrew, right? Because in America they speak English, but you would expect that the Hasidim would still stick to Yiddish. But for the most part, it became an ideological issue. And so you'll see certain Hasidim who speak Hebrew, and the meaning that the yeshiva, the shir in the yeshiva is in Hebrew. which is shocking, because they wouldn't give a shir in the Hasidic yeshiva in English, except for in Chabad. Or if there was something like a Bali Tshuva yeshiva, something. But a regular yeshiva, the shir would be in Yiddish, and it's expected that the Bachar between themselves speak Yiddish, and not English and not Hebrew. But you see, there are so when you see certain Hasidic chatzeros where among themselves they speak Hebrew. You go to a chasana, the announcements are in Hebrew. And even to the point where the shir in the yeshiva, Gemara shir is in Hebrew. To me, that's a very strange thing. Well, many of those in America, of those who speak Hebrew in Israel, speak English in America as well, Boston. For the most part, the Gerach Hasidim speak English in America. Slonim are Hasidim from the Yerushalayim Slonim. Not that there are that many in America. In Yerushalayim, they speak Hebrew in America. Those few that I know of, they speak English. So it's not that strange. And in general, those Hasidus that I mentioned, particularly Slonim in Boston, are very pro-Zionist. They are not in the least bit anti-Zionist. That's the truth. So when you ask me about Borough Park or Boston, and although I have anti-Zionism in Slonim, but not really much, tend to be very strongly Zionist. Not in the Mizrahi sense, no, they're not saying Halal and Hayir, but they are very supportive of the state of Israel for the most part. Much more than you would see in Mir or Panovich. Like I said, the Hasidim would be more Zionist than which is interesting, because you usually assume the anti-Zionism is the Hasidim. There are some explanations for this. One thing I've thought of is that the anti-Zionist Hasidim tend to be the Hungarians, even though Kloisenberg tends to also be more pro-Zionist. Vizhnitz is one that you have some anti-Zionist strains, some pro-Zionist strains. The Muncie Vizhnitz, even though officially they were with Agudah, but they're more like Satmar. The Vizhnitz and Eretz Yisrael, I don't know what it is between the two brothers now. How much? I think one is more Zionist, one is less. I don't know, but they're not extremely Zionist. They're not. They speak in Yiddish. They're not Zionist the way that like Slonim or Ger or Boston or Carlin Stolen maybe is another example that's more pro-Zionist. Belz also has their own. Also, they're Agudas. They're more pro-Zionist, but not as meaning they're not as Zionist as Boston and Slonim. Belz and Ger are about the same. bit less Zionist than Belz and Ger, I would say, in their approach. What I mean Zionist, again, they're not saying Hallel and Heir. They're not waving Israeli flags, but they will, like Panovich, maybe display a flag. They're certainly not opposed to the state, but there's this, certain level of opposition, meaning there's almost no opposition to the state of Israel in Yerushalayim, Slanim, Bnei Brak, Slanim, a different story. Yerushalayim, Slanim, and I love all these places. I have tremendous respect to them. I used to go to Yerushalayim, Slanim every week when I was in Yerushalayim. But Yerushalayim, Slanim, Boston are very pro-Zionist. Maybe Stalin is a little bit less pro-Zionist than they are. and then Ger and Belz are a little bit less, and Visions is less than that. I don't know where Boyan falls in, or some of these others I don't really quite know. I would assume Boyan is similar to Visions. I don't know. And part of what I say about Stalin is only because the breakaways from Stalin are anti-Zionist. Prince Karlin and Kal Hasidim, and they're more anti-Zionist. I don't know. Leitsk, I don't know. Leitsk is probably just the same as Karl and Stalin. They're just two brothers, and they get along. And the Leitsker Rebbe is pretty much just a Chassid, his brother. He has his own medrash, And then, but these other Rebbes I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not going to name, are probably similar to Vishnitz in their approach, but they have a lot of respect for the Ger Hasidim. He's also Polish, even though they're different in their approach and different things. So that would be my answer. Meaning, Slonim or Chassid would have no problem even to go to Salute to Israel parade and wave an Israeli flag in America. But they won't. They're not going to say Hallel on Heir. But they're all within this rubric of Agudah, because Agudah is a big tent of Haredi Judaism. They're trying, and how Havdil, like the conservative movement, tries to be this big tent Judaism. Vis-a-vis, as opposed to Reform and Conservative. The only thing, as Reform and Orthodox, and Orthodox is the right, and Reform is the left, and Conservative is the middle, and they're trying to be that big tent. And they used to be a major movement in America. Now they're the smallest. And Agudah, though, pretty much is maintaining their big tent, with Satmar being on the right and then Mizrahi on the left. Maybe you could compare it in a way, but it's not exactly the same, and it's not fair to really make the comparison. But that's the meaning to the point where, like, the Panovich, Rav Shach had no problem being seen together with Berach Moshe, with the Satmar Rebbe. The same thing Lakewood. They have no problem to be seen together with Satmar. But then again, there were some personal issues that took, now Baruch Hashem, there's more Shalom, but there were divisions in Belz and Satmar, which at least Rabar and Zishvuger, they made peace more or less. Boisenberg and Satmar also more or less made peace. Now you do have these small Hasidic groups that are outright Mizrahi Zionists. There's a Piasetzner Rebbe in Beit Shemesh, very much a Zionist Rebbe, and I don't remember the name now. It's just nifter this year. Heir, the Pashkiner Rebbe. He was aided by the Vishnitzer, by Rebbe who, on Shabbos puts on. That's how, he when he was fearing a tish, he put on the whole bush. But when he was the rest of the time, he would dress like a regular, Mizrahi kippah sruga. And I think his son, it's the same thing. The new Rebbe there, it's the same approach. But that's, he comes from a Rizhiner background. Within Rizhin, you have all the different characters. They say the Bahusha Rebbe is more the anti-Zionist side. I've heard, I don't know. And so you have all these different approaches. I only saw the Bahusha Rebbe one time. I don't know, maybe twice. I don't know. The Tish, a few minutes. I always, when I was a Bacher in Yerushalayim, I would go sometimes to Bnei Brak, other places, I'd hop around the Tish a few minutes to see all the Rebbes, even if I didn't spend the whole time in the Tish, just to put my eyes on the Rebbe, say that I saw him. I know Dr. Breslow says it's a big Indian, like that's a tikkun in the Naim to go to the Tish to see a Rebbe, to see a tzaddik, versus Marecha. Is that you can't pigeonhole, and I'm not judging when I'm comparing. I'm just making statements of comparison. I'm not judging. I don't have an issue that the Rabbanim from Agudah have a different derech than even within Agudah that they should have a different derech. To me, that seems like past. To be honest, that's how it should be. Because they want to have this. That's the concept of Agudah Yisrael, meaning Agudah Achas. They're a bundle together, a group together, and that's their understanding. It's interesting how history, another thing that separates Agudah from not Agudah is the Daf Yomi. Even though many modern Orthodox Mizrahi have embraced the Daf Yomi, those to the right, the Satmar, they don't learn Daf Yomi. Lubavitch, they also don't learn Daf Yomi. When the Daf Yomi started, it's interesting to know though that Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld from the Eidah Chareidis attended the first Siyum HaShas in Yerushalayim. So it seemed that, of course, at that time there was more of unity between Agudah Yisrael and Eidah Chareidis. It's only the Eidah Chareidis broke off, as opposed to, in the meaning that the roots of Eidah Chareidis are originally in Agudah, as opposed to in America. We'll often say that the Hisachdus is in America, the Eidah Chareidis is in Yerushalayim. The Hisachdus is totally original. They didn't break off from anywhere else, as opposed to the Eidah Chareidis kind of broke off from previous existing organizations in a certain sense. Historically speaking, it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that they are still independent, but originally, obviously we see there's much more unity. Not that that matters, because I still feel Elu ve'Elu, we have the right, but the point is that today, you wouldn't have such a thing. So it's a different world that we have today than we used to have. why do you need a separate, if they're both Orthodox, to someone on the outside? Why do you need, and this is kind of something we touched on earlier, why do you need a party for the religious Zionists and for the Agudah, and then within Agudah these different parties? That's something else. But why, at the first point, how do you explain to someone on the outside, they're both Orthodox, why do you need, well, the answer is they have different goals and different approaches. Mizrahi essentially wants a religious state. Agudah has no goal of turning the state religious. So what is their goal? So why do they have a party? It's a religious party. And the answer is it's to protect their interests and to maintain the status quo. Meaning when the state of Israel was founded, they agreed to certain status quo issues with the Orthodox community, mostly because Ben-Gurion assumed that the Orthodox are a dying breed and he'd be able to brainwash all their kids to leave Orthodoxy. And so he allowed certain things to go on so he could get their support and their votes and their participation in the state. Little did he know that, thank God, he was wrong, and the Orthodox continued to grow and strive. So now that the Medina sees that they were not successful in destroying the Orthodox, so now they want to do away with the status quo rules so they can destroy the Orthodox. That's just the honest truth. They say it openly, you know. So that's basically why are there ultra-Orthodox parties? They have no goal of turning everybody religious. They have no goal of making a theocracy because, like I said from the beginning, to a certain extent, that the Satmar approach is correct, meaning Rav Aaron Kotler, he said that a religious state would be worse than a secular state because it's kfira against it's a denial against the idea of the coming of Mashiach. It's a denial that we're going to have a Messiah come. Basically, that's what Rav Aaron Kotler said. He said we're supposed to wait patiently for Mashiach, and now there exists a secular state that's out of our hands, has nothing to do with us. Just if we're living there, we should have an equal voice and maintain, whatever the democratic influence we can have, but it's not for the sake of imposing theocracy, but rather it's for the sake of maintaining our rights. Which would surprise people, because most people would assume the ultra-Orthodox want theocracy and the modern Orthodox are more down to earth, when it's the exact opposite. The modern Orthodox want theocracy, except for those that we mentioned before, like Rav Melchior and perhaps Rav Soloveitchik, who separated their Zionism from their religiosity. They were two separate things. And so their Zionism was essentially secular, and their religiosity was they had a sense of a separation of synagogue and state to a certain extent, even though that doesn't exist in Israel because they have the Rabbanut. But a certain separation, which does exist, but it's not the separation in the sense of the American establishment clause. It's more like the European model, like the British model, where you can be whatever religion you want, but we have an official state religion, And even in Israel, they have the Misrad Datot, and each of the religions, they have government offices and so forth. And there's a government office and an interfaith Misrad Datot, which Samarov was very upset about. Not only that, but he was upset, writes in the Real Moshe, that he's shocked. Why does the Agudah Hafrada Datot, meaning you're going to sit together with other religions and we recognize the others. And again, this goes back to old history of one thing I didn't express, but it's a sociological thing that you could perhaps understand, is the difference between Hungarian Jews and Polish Jews and Russian Jews, Polish Russian Jews. Why would the Hungarians perhaps be more anti-Zionist than the Polish and Russians? Sociologically speaking, not religiously speaking. We're talking about sociology now, and people might be offended by this, but I think it's true. But the fact of the matter is that the Hungarian Jews were much more engaged, even the ultra-Orthodox Hungarians were much more engaged in Hungarian society. They spoke Hungarian. I mean, my Zayda was modern Orthodox. He was born in America. He grew up only speaking Hungarian. He didn't learn English till he went to school. And they had Hungarian names. My elder Zayda, I'm named Yitzchak after. He had a name Ignatz. And even today, you go to Satmar communities and so forth, they tend to have English names, which meaning the modern Orthodox generally tend to not give English names, meaning their Hebrew name will often, not always, but especially the younger people, sometimes it goes by the families, but generally speaking, if you look at the modern Orthodox, their children's legal names will be a lot, and it's the same with the yeshiva, and usually with the Russian and the Polish Hasidim as well. Generally, not as much with the Polish, but certainly with the Russian Hasidim, they will only have Hebrew or Yiddish names. They will not have an English name. Meaning their legal name will be Moshe, Shmuel, whatever, Yehuda. That will be, as opposed to if you look at the Hungarians. I taught in Satmar in the Cheder, taught English, and I remember one of the boys there, his name was Mordechai, but as an English teacher I was given their legal names, and so his legal name was Martin, and they never used that name, but they have such names, and bearing that, usually they'll have anglicized versions of their biblical names, meaning Moshe will be Moses, Joseph will be Joseph, those will be, will be Samuel, and so forth, and often have anglicized versions of their Yiddish names. So like Lipa will be Leopold, they might call him Leo, something like that. But even people with names like Moshe might get a name like Melvin, or I've seen it, and it's in Satmar, someone named Yitzchak, and I see as an English name Eugene, and generally they tend to do this, and this goes back really to the way things were in Hungary, that they had Hungarian names. Like I said, my elder Zayda, I said, Yitzchak, his Hebrew name was Yitzchak, and his Hungarian name was Ignatz, and so forth. And still some of the modern Orthodox give English names. We see Jared Kushner, his Hebrew name is Yoel, but he is called by an English name Jared. And so you see, the different, there are different approaches, but for the most part, that's what you can find. Of course, we're talking to Jared Kushner. said, the Hungarians were more comfortable in their countries where they lived. And so they didn't have this disconnect from their native lands, as opposed to native, I mean where they were born. You know, where they were born, where they were raised, where they lived. And part of that was also because the Hungarian Gentiles were more more tolerant and more worldly and more elegant than, and it's similar to how you had in Poland, and I mean in Germany. Also in Germany they gave German names, and the only difference was that the Hungarian Jews tend to be more religious, meaning the neologue in Hungary, which was like the Hungarian version of Reform, was more like what we would call in America modern Orthodox. You know, the difference was that, you know, that they still had the mechitza, they still had, it's just that they would give, the rabbi would give us Hungarian, you know, that was the major difference, you know, like between the neologue and the Orthodox in Hungary. But for the Hungarian Jews, that was already a breach. Except, you know, the big cities, Budapest, then you had like real reform eventually. But for the most part, the original Hungarian reformists, the neologue, were essentially Orthodox. And Orthoprax, really, both Orthodox and Orthoprax. It was just, you know, things that today we wouldn't consider to be strange at all. Maybe putting Bima up front, you know, I think that was an issue in Hungary. I'm not sure, but the neologue, I'm not exactly sure. And sometimes you had cases in Hungary where the neologue Rabbanim were bigger Talmidei Chachamim than the Haredi Rabbanim. How to balance that and things like that, which is something that you never saw in the Reform and, you know, so forth. Generally not. Generally the Haredi Rabbanim were the bigger Talmidei Chachamim, but there were cases in certain towns where you'd have neologue Rabbanim who were Talmidei Chachamim with the Haredi Rabbanim. But for the most part, like I said, the Hungarians stayed Orthodox, unlike the Germans, where very small minority who were Orthodox. In Hungary, the majority was still Orthodox. When you went to places like, and also for that reason there really wasn't these Haskalah movements like you saw in Lithuania and Russia, and certainly in Germany. You didn't have such things in Hungary until very late. Just didn't exist. Just didn't. Now, Polish and Russian Jews had nothing to do with the Gentiles around them. They didn't speak the language for the most part. Later on in history they did, but initially they didn't. And so it was a much different approach. They had nothing to do with those around them, and so they were more likely to feel. Of course, it was much more anti-Semitism in those countries as well. Hungary did not have as much anti-Semitism as Poland and Russia did. So these types of issues were bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment. But basically, that's why you'll see in Borough Park and Muncie and these places a sense of non-Zionism that's not anti-Zionist and sometimes seems somewhat pro-Zionist. That's basically my answer, is that there are, but still they won't be saying Hallel on Ha'ir, and they agree with the anti-Zionist idea that they have no intention of establishing a theocracy before Mashiach comes. You know, that's, I think, the major Tzad HaShava, the major similarity between the all Charedim, for the most part, although there are Chardalim, there are Charedim who essentially are Zionists, but for the most part, the major difference between the Haredi approach, both non-Zionist, anti-Zionist, and the religious Zionist approach, that is simultaneous, that their Zionism comes from the religion, and not that they're two separate issues, which is different, is this question of theocracy. And in those things, the left, and it's interesting, the more left-wing people in the religious Zionist movement, those who separate their religion from their Zionism, would find more in common ideologically with the Haredim, with this issue, not with other issues like, secular studies and things like that, and even approaches in halacha and so forth. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Particularly the Hungarians generally will, give Piskei halacha that or leave the hilchasa. So that's that's the major difference that I can see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just making this up. This is just my experiences. These are just some stories that I've experienced that I want to share with you all. Answers I can give the differences between. And so that would be the non-Zionist camp, of the ultra-Orthodox, which we generally consider Agudah, that maybe they don't have such a problem with the state of Israel as it exists today. They definitely want to maintain the status quo, and they'll vote in the elections and so forth. But they do not. But they only seek to maintain the status quo. They do not seek to make a theocracy. So that is a major difference between the Zionists and the non-Zionists. That the real religious Zionists really believe that eventually this state of Israel will somehow develop into a theocracy, as opposed to the Haredi approach that says, no, God's going to take care of that. We don't have any business in that, but we're, the Jews who live in Eretz Israel now just want to maintain their lifestyles and their status quo, and that's it. And so that's the major difference. All right, but they do vote in Israel. They do participate in the government. They do. Sometimes they even serve in the army. Sometimes they don't. But they don't mix religion and politics. Their political activities are to maintain their own personal interests, including monetary interests and freedoms, and religious freedom, but not at total religious freedom, but rather whatever is the status quo. That things that have always been in Israel since the founding in 1948, the Rabbanut and so forth, they want to maintain those things. Not necessarily impose, but not really impose anything new. Meaning, you'll see what are they fighting about, the Mechitza, the Kotel, because since 1967 they had it. So why should they change now? You know, if they didn't have it from the beginning, they probably wouldn't have said anything. And probably just saying that also, they probably wouldn't be going there and davening either. You know, it wouldn't be what it is today. Basically, you know, the same thing. The army. Well, since 1948, the yeshiva Baruchim were exempt from the army. So why do they want to change it now? You know, and so they'll get up and protest things that have already been a certain way from the beginning, and they want to change them. That's when they would get up and protest. You know. That's basically. But, all right. Again, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and like to discuss more. All right. God bless you all.